Welcome to the Writer's Block, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Today we have Christopher Clawson on the Writer's Block. Chris, where are you from?
No, almost closed it for no reason.
Right now I'm in Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida.
Oh, must be nice.
Wow, you see the red face? Yes, it's nice.
We just had a huge nor'easter, so everything is just starting to melt again now.
It's going to be about 89 here today.
Oh, you can stop talking. So Chris and I know, Chris is a fellow author, and I know him because my story, Hall of Justice, was featured in, when you were doing Breaking Rules Publishing, there was the First Degree anthology, and that was my first major publication. I had some littler ones in the past, but that was sort of the first one for me. And now you're doing magazines, a quarterly magazine, different kinds of magazines, right?
That is correct. So backing up a little bit, the publishing company is still kind of there, but I'm not actually being very proactive about it. Meaning that I'm not publishing anymore. Only the people who've been published are on the website. And that's more of an advertising thing and a place for them to sell their books than it is for me to actually publish anymore. I just am tired of that. So I'm just done. The new project is just the magazines, and I decided that I wanted to make them 4 different ones throughout the year and make them quarterly, and they would be about things that I am interested in. So that's what I'm doing.
So what are the different themes?
So the first one is called Front Row, and it's all about things that you would actually be in the front row for. So movies, theater, television, and then fashion, which is really kind of interesting. And then the next one is called, Leap, and that's all dance. Anything that has to do with dance companies, dancers, dance competitions, that kind of thing.
Cool.
Because I used to dance when I was younger, if that's where you're going. And then The next one is called Someday. And someday your artwork will be on my wall, or someday I'll be reading your book, or someday I'll listen to your music. So anything that has to do with the arts, because it's based on people who actually need to have their work lifted as opposed to people who are already there. So that's the concept there. And then the next one is 101 Christopher Street. Years ago, there was an LGBT magazine called Christopher Street, because Christopher Street is this big, huge gay street in New York City, and it closed down years and years ago, like probably 20 years ago. And I wanted to come up with something that kind of brought that whole theme back into, and it's my name, so it kind of helps that out a lot too. So that's where I'm going.
Cool. So that street would have been big in the 90s then? It was 20 years ago, right? This was the 90s. What year is it?
24. Well, like 30 years ago.
That street is still big now, and then it was big in the 70s and the 80s, pretty much. That's where Stonewall happened, and it's just still a very gay mecca. So
is that anywhere near? I just watched a documentary about, I think, Studio 54. Was it?
Studio 54 is actually on 54th Street.
Okay.
Way up past Times Square, and Christopher Street is down in the Village, Greenwich Village, so a little bit further down.
All right. And yeah, so Clarence and I, a couple of weeks ago, you interviewed us for the Someday magazine.
Yes.
And we had a great conversation. We're excited to be featured in that. You interviewed me as an author, Clarence as an author, me as a musician, and both of us as the Writer's Block.
Correct.
Yep.
It was an interesting conversation.
Yeah. All right. So let's just jump into some generic questions then. Before I assume you have your words prepared. You're going to tell a story with us today.
I can tell a story if you want me to.
Awesome. Yes. But first, so you've written, I think I counted 12 books to this day.
Well, 9. There's been 9 books, and then there's 4 short stories.
Oh, okay.
Of my own. There have been, when we were doing Breaking Rules Publishing, I would put a story in one of the magazines that we had, or put a story in one of the anthologies that we had.
Yeah.
But that's not mine. I published 9 books on their own, and then 4 short stories on their own, which are really kind of like 120 pages, like a novella.
So what genre would you say that you write in typically?
They categorize it as romance suspense. I just don't happen to find it to be really very romantic or really very suspenseful. I think of it more as the human experience and more of the everyday life, that things that people don't tell anybody else about. I like to write about those things.
Secrets. Yeah.
A really good explanation is my second book is called The Trade, and it starts with the World Trade Center falling down.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about that at all. It's actually about the trade-off that you have in life. So something happens, you get a flat tire on your way to a job interview and you lose the job. And by losing the job, then you lose your house because you don't have a job. Or you have a family of 5 and one of your spouses dies. Now you're a family of 4 and you have a business of your own. Now you have to try and figure out how you're going to run your business and raise your kids without that extra person around. Things like that people have to struggle through that no one actually thinks about. They just think that once something happens, you just go on and you find your way. And they don't think about all the struggles that you have to go through to actually make life work all over again.
So real world relatable problems. So I guess technically I would say that that's in the just straight up literary genre.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And because we were also talking about how I always do twists in my stories because I tend to write science fiction and horror. But you were talking also about how you kind of ended up doing a twist in I think it was Delacroix.
I did, yeah. So the book was going along really, and you know what? I think you'll probably relate to this. When you're a writer, you're kind of like, yeah, I like the story. The story is good. It's kind of going along. But even when you get into like page 200, you're like, okay, this book's got to change because now I'm getting kind of, the flow is not moving up or down. It's all being consistent. So this particular one, I just decided to throw a wrench in the whole thing and turn it all on its ear. And the good guy became the bad guy, and a really bad guy. And it just became much more fun for me to write.
So have you found since that book that you've written more in that direction, or are you still doing what you were doing before?
You know, when there were 2 books that I wrote, and then one of them is called Wild Swan. That's the first one I started, but I didn't finish it. And it starts out with this car on fire and this man just watching the car burn. And then you kind of get a little backstory as to why he's there. But then you don't hear from him again until a little bit later. And it just kind of like builds. So it's like kind of like every 3rd or 4th chapter, this guy kind of floats in and you kind of get more of his story. And then it kind of floats in, you get more of his story. And then you figure out why he's actually there. I kind of dig that.
Cool.
It's like, you know, this story with these people are actually kind of like the hub of it all. But you've got this guy kind of wanting to get in and beat them down, but he can't until the very end when he possibly does.
So it sounds like you've got the beginnings of your stories always start with something very big. So it's interesting to me because it feels like it draws the reader in.
This is one of my short stories I wrote. I always wanted to start a story in the bedroom and with people having sex. So I thought, why not?
Right into the sex.
So when I did this particular book, the guy they were having sex, and the guy told his partner, the girl, that he was breaking up with her. And not to be too graphic, but they were still in the midst of this all. So she's like totally stunned at what's going on. And she took her fingernail and she dug it into his chest and his nipple as he was coming to orgasm. And he thought it was great. And she was like, dude, you're done. And so it was I just kind of wanted to jolt. I just wanted to jolt the reader right into it. Yep. And then to say, okay, now again, the trade. Now what are you going to do? And she had to kind of make her life up again because this guy had to leave.
I like that. It's funny. It's a great way to start with suspense.
Well, you kind of like, I mean, people don't do that. I mean, people don't jar you right away. No. They kind of like lead you into this nice little story, and then they kind of jar you somewhere in the middle, and they give you an end. Why not just jar them right away?
There's a term for it, but I can't remember what it's called.
That's that's what they tell you to do in screenwriting for movies. So
yes.
Have you ever written anything for screen or thought about doing anything for that?
I have thought about it. I'm actually trying to work one of my books into a screenplay now, and I'm, not having ever done it before, so I've copied up a whole bunch of screenplays so I can read up and find out how to do it. And I'm taking some webinars to find out how to do that all, because it's a totally different situation.
Mm-hmm.
There's when you're writing the book, you have so much more freedom to do and to say whatever you want. I mean, the color on the walls is cream, or the coffee was really, really hot. You can't do that in a screenplay. You just have to give dialogue and the reason why people are there. And then it's set up totally different. And it's going to take me a minute to figure that out.
Yeah, Clarence has been working a lot with screenplays.
Yeah.
Do you find the same thing?
Yep. The format is different. It's a little more constricted. There's no wiggle room.
No.
Yeah.
No. And so actually some of the things that I've been hearing is the people who are making the movies don't actually care about what mood your characters are in, or where they are, or what the room looks like, or whatever, because they want to do that themselves. They just want to have the dialogue with the story and make sure that that's really, really good. And then you can move on from there, which is very contradictory to how I write. So it's really difficult.
It's more of a team atmosphere, at least by the time it's all said and done. You have to...
Oh, yeah.
With writing, like you said, you have all the control. You're building this world. But then knowing that you're handing it off to a director, editors, actors especially, you have to be willing to lose control and let your story evolve in other people's eyes.
It's interesting that you say that. I was interviewing a director and a producer a couple weeks ago for one of the magazines, and I was asking her how she felt about people watching her work on screen. And I said, before you begin, I said, me as a writer, I enjoy writing the book, but what's the really cool part about it is when someone else reads it, they're creating the whole thing in their head.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're creating the movie that they want to see up into their head, not what I want to see. I'm only giving them the tools. So when they talk to me about why did you do this or why did you do that, or I really like this part, and sometimes that doesn't even occur to me when I'm writing it, which is really kind of interesting. But when you're watching something on the screen, that's it. I mean, your mind can't change that, because that's what you're actually watching. So you're getting their point of view as opposed to what I wrote and you can kind of make up.
No interpretation. No room for interpretation.
Exactly.
I feel like, aside from the fact that movies, anything on the screen is just easier to consume for most people, the reason movies and TV are more accessible to a lot of people is also because of that, because there's more people involved in the process up to the point of release. So you've got all of these different people interpreting it the way they see it and including that on the screen. So there's more room for accessibility, I guess.
It's true. It's true.
But half the fun of reading is jumping into the author's mind and empathizing with these other characters. You're supposed to leave yourself. So
you're right.
Yeah.
I compare it. Prose fiction is like chess, whereas screenplay writing is like checkers. Like in chess, there's a lot of depth, there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of moving. Whereas checkers, it's very, I don't want to call it simple, because some screenwriters are really good and they do really, but you're really just moving pieces. I mean, it doesn't have.
It's very haphazard in a way. You're right.
Yeah, that's the way I equate it in my head anyway.
That's a very good way to look at it.
I just finished, if you're looking for material for learning how to write scripts better, I just finished Save the Cat. I know Clarence has read that.
Yeah.
And there's an audio.
Okay.
There's an audio version as well. That's the one I did. But...
So years ago, and I don't even know if you know this movie, it's called Crash.
Yeah. Yeah, is that the one with multiple perspectives going on?
Yes. So all the stories within the movie, the characters relate in some way.
Mm.
In some way. And when I watched it for the very first time, I was even now it happens now. I was in the movie theater and I was just overtaken with emotion that I literally was crying in the theater. Everyone left the theater and I still sat there, and it was just too much. I couldn't not move out of the theater. And then when I finally did, I sat down outside it on a bench and was still crying. It was ridiculous. So when I went back to read it, and I thought, I don't get it. I'm not crying at this moment. This is crazy. And it's just because there is no emotion in the script. It's all you see on the screen is something totally different.
Yeah,
I'll have to rewatch that.
that's a fair assessment.
But that's sort of the dream, either with scripts or scripts becoming movies, or our stories, is to have our stories impact people in that way. So
I
that's
agree.
what life's all about, I think, those moments.
I totally agree with you. I've had several people read my books and they tell me how not that it changed their lives, but it really spoke to them.
Mm-hmm.
What was interesting about it is I had one of them in a review. There was like a book club that wanted to review it, and then I would go there after they were done, and then I would discuss it with them. And one of the guys who was there said he had a problem with the way I talked or my characters spoke in the book. And I said, can you be more specific? And he said, well, they're always saying go with, or do you want to come with? And I said, where are you from? And his guy was from New Jersey. And I said, okay, there's not much I can do for that. I said, but let's say if you were in Texas and you wanted to say y'all, or you wouldn't say you all, you would say y'all. And he's like, okay. And I said, if you're from Michigan, you don't complete the sentence. You always say go with. And he's like, all right. And I said, so if I were to write a story that wrote that out and these people were in Michigan, it wouldn't be believable because the way that they talk isn't inside the book. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do that kind of thing, unless it's going to be a generalized, it can be anywhere kind of thing, you have to be specific to the location where you are. And that's just something that Michiganders do, is they always say, do you want to come with? So
I feel like, because we've talked about this before, I feel like if you're doing that in a script, that might actually, again, be something that's more accessible, because you can see those characters interacting. And so you don't just need the dialogue that you might not understand. You have sort of more context. But yeah, because I do that a lot. And I think that everybody should, because it's what makes your characters unique and obviously puts them in the place that they're from. But instead of just flat, straight, grammatically correct dialogue, which is boring.
So there you are. So, what's the genre that you guys write in?
I do mostly speculative fiction, we'll say. Sci-fi, speculative.
Okay.
And I do mostly horror and young adult.
Okay. So maybe that won't work. Let's just say that you were working and you were doing a sci-fi thing. And all the characters, because this is year 2255, and all the characters were very precise in their speech. How boring would that be? You would have to have a character that had some sort of change in their voice or change in their sentence structure to make it so people would be a little bit more intrigued with what they were having to say, as opposed to everybody having the same voice throughout the entire story. Don't you think?
Yes.
I mean, when you think about it, even Star Trek, Mr. Spock and the way he speaks, his cadence, whatever, is totally different from everybody else's.
Yeah.
And Jim Kirk is the same way. I mean, even now people are like, and mimicking how he talked because it was so odd.
Right. And you're onto something here, because people don't speak in full grammatically correct sentences. People speak with slang, broken sentences. Sometimes they have inflections, like, things that change their speech, stutters, stammers, stuff like that. And if you can put it into your fiction without overdoing it, without beating the reader to death with it, it can add a different element.
Texture.
Yeah, even Shakespeare, I think he broke the rules grammatically with the way his characters spoke.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree with you.
And that's part of what makes his work interesting as well, I think. Interesting. What an understatement. Shakespeare's okay.
Nah.
Shakespeare's all right.
Yeah, that guy.
It is what it is.
Did you have any questions you wanted before
Tell us a little bit more about your time in New York.
This is a really cool story. So, when I got out of high school, I didn't want to actually go to college. I wanted to take a year off and decide what I wanted to do, because at that time I was just living in this little bitty town and knew I needed to get out and wasn't sure how I was going to do it. So when I went, my mom talked me into going to the community college in our area. And when she did, she kind of said, why don't you take this dance class? You like dancing, you can take this dance class. I had never taken a dance class in my life. And I'm like, Mom, this is not the same as being out on a dance floor having a good time. This is actual dance. Just do it, take it. Well, when I took the class, the director of the department came to me halfway through the semester and said, we'd like to offer you a full scholarship for next semester. Really? Come on. I've been doing this for a couple months. So of course, and I should preface this by saying my father told me that if I paid for the first 2 years of college, he would pay for my second 2 years of college, which is fair because that means you're going to finish it, right?
Yeah.
So I took it. So at this point, I paid like $200 for my education so far. Because at that time, you have to remember this was 1980 and tuition wasn't so bad then. And so I took it. Well, at the end of the year, she gave me another full year scholarship to go through. So now I still paid $200 for my first 2 years of college. So I'm cool because now my dad's going to pay for the rest. Well, as we were going through, she said, I think that you should audition for NYU in their dance department. And so now we're talking a year and a half of dancing and you want me to go to NYU and dance in New York City. That just makes no sense to me whatsoever. The people that I was dancing with had been doing this since they're 3 and 4. And now I've been doing this for a year and a half and you think that I can go and do this? You're crazy. There were 10 of us who decided to go into New York. I went just because I wanted a trip to New York. And when I did this, I got in. I was actually the only one who got in from those 10 people.
Oh.
So here I am going to New York City. Now my father's like, now I have to pay for this. At that time, it was $35,000 a year to go. So I'm like, this is the deal. So I went to New York. And the second time I was there, when I got there, the second semester, the department head came to me and said, I think that you should audition for Eric Hawkins. They're a modern company, and that's where a lot of what I was doing in my first school. Again, 2 years in, and you're thinking I should go dance with a company? Are you out of your mind? This is crazy. Well, I went and auditioned, and I got in. I was dancing in the morning for my classes at NYU and doing my early afternoon classes that you have to take, and then I was dancing in the afternoon with Eric Hawkins. As the next year came around and I was graduating, they said, I think that you should go to the Joffrey Ballet because they have that whole jazzy feel, modern jazzy feel, and it's really what you are. And now we're talking, I've been doing this for 4 years, and the idea of me getting into a major ballet company was idiotic. But I win, and I got in. So I stayed there, and I danced with both of the companies for about a year, maybe a year and a half. My parents got sick all at the same time, so I had to go back and help them. Started a whole situation and got myself into, I created a nonprofit with dance and music and drama and creative writing and art all under one umbrella. And I offered the classes to underprivileged kids, which got me into the nonprofit world. And I did that for about 10 years. But from there, after we had to close because the funding kind of fell out in Michigan for the arts, I went back to New York because AMFAR, the American Foundation for AIDS Research, asked me to come and help them out with their cause-related marketing and special events. That just escalated into going from there to the John O'Donnell Company, and then I ended up at the Riverside Church and working for them, doing the same kind of development work that I'm doing actually now here in St. Petersburg. It was kind of a crazy thing. I've lived in New York City 3 or 4 times and just loved every minute of it. I've been very lucky.
So where does the writing come in? Because I know you have an interesting story about your first book.
Yeah, that's a good one too. So my 16-year-old daughter, or when my daughter was 16, said, why don't you, asked me how I liked the story that I was reading, because I was reading a lot. And I said, I could write a better story. And she said, why don't you? This is something for the two of you, so that when your 16-year-old child comes to you, that you know this is what you have to do. You have to kind of like go to the challenge and say, okay, fine, I will. So I sat down and I wrote this book, the first one, Bless Me, Father. And when I gave it to her, I typed it up and gave it to her. And she's like, Dad, that's just a manuscript. So I said, fine. And then I worked to find a publisher who would publish it. And then I got that done. I put it in her hand. I said, there you are. There's the book. And she said, now what you going to do with it, Dad? And I had no idea, because the publisher that I had wasn't. They were more of a they were going to help you, but they weren't going to help you.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to figure out how I was going to do something with this book. So we were living in New York City at the time, and I bought 100 copies, and I gave them away on the subway so that people could just read them there. And have you been to New York City before?
Yes.
Yes.
And you've gone on the subway?
Yep.
No.
Everyone is reading, everyone is listening to music, and everyone is reading the newspaper. So they're doing something. So if you had a book and you saw a book on the subway that someone was reading, or two people were reading the same book, you would think, I need to get that book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because of that, those 100 copies, I sold 17,000.
Yeah, that's crazy. We got to get to New York.
So it was kind of cool. And since then, I do a lot of out of the box things to try and market myself. And, it works.
Speaking of marketing, there's an interesting section in Save the Cat about, I don't know if it goes on to this extent anymore, but back in the 90s, I guess there was like spec wars. Actually, I don't know when this book was written, so I don't know when he was referring to. But yeah, it must have been the 90s, because he was saying when they would pitch the script to studios, they would go all out with, like, for example, Hocus Pocus, the people were dressed up as witches. There were a couple, or there was another one where they'd send out, like, prepare for this date packages to all the studio execs. And then there'd be like some sort of timer that would count down, and it would buzz for all of them at the same exact time when that pitch was being made. Just interesting stuff like that I thought was cool.
See,
well, I think it's interesting that perception, how it carries over. I mean, with Breaking Rules Publishing, I had so many authors come to me and say, I want a $10,000 advance on my book. I'm just sitting here thinking, no. And the reason why is because most of the people who came to me then couldn't actually get their book published anywhere else. And that was the reason why I made it, was to help the people who couldn't get published so that they could, and then help them market it so that they could actually do something with it. Them not knowing that the average book sells about 150 copies if you're lucky,
mm-hmm.
you equate that into sales, that's not $10,000.
No.
So me giving someone $10,000 for a book that I didn't even know was going to sell just makes no sense whatsoever. They're thinking, well, this is the way it was in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, where you got this big, huge advance and you lived off of that. Mm-hmm. And you got these big, huge $1 million for the book because you sold so much. Well, you think people, there's, what do they say, 4 million? There's like 4.5 million authors on Amazon right now.
Yeah. Sounds about.
So where's all that money going? I mean, people, not everyone sells their book, or they don't sell many of them, mm-hmm. or the ones that do are working really hard to promote themselves to do that. Mm-hmm. And you just can't put your book in my hands and say, here, go, and me give you $10,000 and you're going to sell 150 copies.
No.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, I was reading an article about how the publishers, before the internet, they'd have deals with different stores where people would actually go to get their books. Mm-hmm. And they'd have a certain amount of space, or like a whole shelf dedicated to that publishing company. So then they'd have the authors that they were willing to pay to consistently pump out books, and then they would put it on the shelves. There was guaranteed placement there, and there was sort of a guaranteed audience. So the money would have been worth it in that case.
You're right. So here's a really good story for you. Right before Harry Potter hit, Scholastica, is a Scholastic Publications, whatever it is. They have their own publishing company, but they also have their own bookstores mm-hmm. around the country, so that they can market and they can sell all these books that they have on top of whatever sells somewhere else. So they're doing that promotion and that marketing for you. But now I have to know, what did Harry Potter? Who promoted her? Who?
I think Scholastic. So there's been.
Is it Scholastic? Is it Scholastic? Isn't it?
I don't know if Scholastic does Harry Potter, but I think that there's like bins at the local supermarket, and I asked somebody about them. They said they're all like kids books, and they get them by the bin, and they're like $5 books, and I think that's a Scholastic thing. So I was trying to get my kids books.
I gotta know. So it's Scholastic.
Is Harry Potter?
So, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So it's funny. I have this habit of you've got this computer in your hand. So when there's something that you don't know, you just have to look it up because Google is free.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I do. I am always Googling something.
All right. So it's been about 30 minutes. What do you say we tell a story?
What kind of story would you like?
It's really up to you. Well, it's up to you to start. You're going to start the story, and then
that's right.
It's going to go to me and then Clarence, and we're just going to take turns. You can go as long as you want on your turn. You can just pass it off if you can't think of anything. Did you come prepared with your 5 words?
No.
Okay, so
I need 5 words.
Google random word generator. There's a site, and have it generate 5 random words. You can write stuff down, and it's just a little extra fun challenge if you want to try to sneak your words into the story, and then after the story, we're going to have a bonus conversation where we're going to try to guess each other's words, and then you can do any shout outs that you have.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Link drops and all that good stuff.
Come on.
So I'm going to let you...
Do the 5 words have to be in the first part of the story, or can they just be anywhere in the story?
Anywhere, and you don't have to use them. It's just a fun little extra game. Be warned, Clarence is very good at sneaking them all in.
I need a piece of paper so I can do some guessing.
Where's your...
The 7 cousins were at Perk Up Coffee Shop brainstorming about what their vacations were going to be.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay. 7 cousins perk up. Every year, the cousins would go on vacation together, and they'd all put in their ideas into an old cowboy hat, and the first pick would be where they'd go. And it was anywhere. It could be the other side of the world for all they cared, because it was all coming from the money of the Uncle Jed, who was a successful businessman with all kinds of businesses all over the world. He was even into some shady stuff that they didn't like to talk about because they were happy to go on vacation. So they all put in their ideas in the hat, and Uncle Jed took the hat and he shook it, and he gave his trademark charming smile. He had one golden tooth that nobody knew where it came from, and nobody ever asked. We never talked about it. Mm-hmm. He shook the hat and he reached in and he pulled out
a slip of paper. The slip of paper read New York City. Everyone looked at each other. Can we pick again? They said jokingly. New York. All right, we're going to New York, everybody. Put on your ballet shoes. Get ready. And everyone clapped and cheered. And as they were planning out the trip, they were Googling. And a woman sitting behind them overheard, and she said, "Oh, you guys are going to New York. That's fantastic. I was there on Broadway back in 1977. I was a young dancer, and I used to be quite the showgirl back in the day." And she began to go on this diatribe, this storytelling about how she'd been very popular. Go ahead, take it.
She'd been very popular in the off-Broadway sector. She decided that she was going to move from New York City and go off into a different line of work because it just wasn't working for her. She wasn't moving up as much as she wanted to. So she moved to Ohio. In Ohio, she found... I don't want to do this. In Ohio, she found a different way of life that was something totally different to her. And she continued to tell the story to the cousins, but they became very disinterested. So as they turned their backs and continued working on their own vacation that they were going to New York, they decided that they would actually pick again, that they wanted to have a non-English speaking country that they went to. Go.
Oh, so they're redrawing?
Yeah.
Redrawing.
Okay. Who was the woman? I completely spaced there.
Just some random
She was
woman.
just someone, a customer behind them.
Okay. Well, little did the cousins know that little Jimmy was wanting to be a Broadway star. So he was really wanting to go to New York, but he thought, where else could I pitch where Broadways are big? And so he pulled out his cellular device and he Googled it, and he found that
He found that ballet was very popular in Taiwan, of all places. Bizarre, but interesting. And as they're going back and forth, specifically about Broadway and about dance and musicals, they drew the next place, and they came up with not quite Taiwan. They came up with China. China. Everyone looked at each other and they kind of gave each other that look. You know which look, because they know that the Chinese government is not notoriously great. China it is, they say. And
that's how the writer's block got banned from China.
And that's how we are not rich in China. So a few weeks go by and everyone's packed and everybody's boarding their plane. They're all giving each other the look. They're curious. They're kind of excited. They're a little afraid. Not all of them had been to those parts of the world, but some of them had. And they're goofing off and they're having a blast and they're walking onto their plane when one of them says, "You know what else would be fun when we're in China? What if we took a long, leisurely stroll on the Great Wall?" Take it.
That's where I was going to take it to. I mean, that's
where you're going to go. It's funny.
I like that the characters are basically the seven cousins.
Yeah.
And little Jimmy. Uncle Jed, I guess.
Little Jimmy. Are we keep going?
Yep.
Okay. So at that moment, everyone's cell phones decided to go off, and they were alerted that their aunt's design shop was on fire downtown. It went off again, and they found out that one of their parents' law offices was also on fire. And then it went off again, and another one's, their uncle's orchard was also catching on fire. They had to get off the plane to find out what was going on so they could use their phones to contact their relatives. They decided to delay their trip and to go back and help. Once they got to the orchard, they saw their uncle running into this burning barn. One of them went to a hose trying to figure out if they could help with the fire, waiting for the fire trucks to come. Another one went in to help, and as the fire trucks arrived, the burning barn fell to the ground with their uncle and one of the cousins left inside. Little did they know that there was also a cement block room inside the barn where the uncle pulled the cousin. Let's name the cousin Jack. And the uncle's name is Tristan. So Tristan and Jack are now in this cement room, guarding themselves from the fire in the building that has just fallen down around them. Not knowing how they were going to get out, they closed the door and just kind of settled in. The people on the outside, the cousins, were trying to figure out how they could get them out until one of them remembered that the cement block room was there and that there was a dirt floor in the room. So they went around the side of the barn that was still up, figured out where the cement barn room was in relation to the barn, and started digging a hole so that they could dig a hole underneath the barn and into the cement block. Once they were able to do that, they were able to pull Jack out of the barn. And as they pulled, tried to get Tristan out, the barn and actually collapsed on top of him, and he perished in the fire.
Jack perished?
No, Tristan perished.
Tristan did. Tristan perished.
Well, that escalated quickly. And while this was going on, little Jimmy sat with. I just realized I didn't intend that as a reference to. We have another character from a video game I made called Little Jimmy, but that's not him. This is a different Little Jimmy in a different universe. So Little Jimmy is sitting with his cousin Jack, and he's scared, but he's also sad that apparently they're not going on their vacation this year. They've lost a cousin, so now they're down to 6. And Uncle Jed is nowhere to be found. So while they're sitting there waiting for someone to rescue them, Jack says, just to fill the void, says, "You know that this is one of Uncle Jed's oldest properties, right? It's rumored that there's something magical going on here, and that's why he's kept it, because otherwise there's nothing of value here, and I don't get it." And clearly he's getting his riches somewhere. So little Jimmy perked up a little bit. He said, "What kind of magic?" Little Jimmy is like 8 years old. So he still kind of believes in some of this stuff, and like magic and Santa Claus and stuff like that. So he's willing to believe in this tale that Jack is spinning. And Jack goes on, takes a moment to think about how he's going to build on this lie that he just started to tell. And he's remembering Jimmy's desire to be a dancer. He says, there's a pair of shoes in there that it's rumored are magical. They make you just 10 times the dancer that you were before. And if we get them, they put out fires.
Little Jimmy was infatuated with the magical shoes immediately. He went on his journey, avoiding the parts of the woods that were still ablaze, in search of the magical shoes and possibly other loot. And as he went, there was smoke rolling high above, and he was careful not to get too close, but he could feel the heat, feel the flames that were kind of licking him. And as he goes, he's looking around and finds a giant rock, or a series of rocks. And it looks like there's space between them, maybe a cave, maybe a something. So Jimmy moves closer, looking over his shoulder, making sure that nobody is watching him. And he hunkers down, and he sort of scoots across some rocks with his hands, and plunges himself into this little cave. And he goes further and further. And the further he goes, the less he can hear, and the less he can see. It's getting dark, but he keeps going because he thinks that he can see something. It looks small, but maybe fluorescent or sparkly, or he's not really sure. And he's almost convinced that this just may be the shoes. So he continues trenching deeper and deeper. And as he goes, he feels something shifting, and it makes him afraid. And it feels like it is, in fact, a rock. And the rock dislodges itself from above him, lands on his ankle, and shatters it immediately. Take it.
Oh, dear God. This is... Okay, let me think about this for a second. Shatters his ankle completely, making him have to use his arms and upper body to crawl even further into the hole. There was this fantastic light at the end that he was finally able to see, and it was in fact the shoes that he was looking for. Once he was able to get them, and he picked them up and tried to put them on his feet, realizing that they were just too big. Because of this, he had no words and didn't know what he was going to say or what he was going to do, how he was going to get out of the hole. As he continued to keep the shoes on his feet, he noticed that the shoes started to shrink and actually form to his foot, healing the ankle that had just been smashed. As he stood, he saw another light at the end of the tunnel. Walking towards it, he was able to come out the other side. the world that he thought that he had come from wasn't the world that he was walking into. It's almost like a Dorothy Wizard of Oz kind of thing, but it actually wasn't. It was much more stark and much more depressing. The only thing that actually had any kind of color or light were the shoes on his feet that were sparkling. Walking forward, he tried to find his way back if he could, thinking if he went around the rocks, he'd be able to find his way back home. That didn't work. So he tried to go up and above it, and that didn't work. He was at the very top, not knowing what else he was going to do, and decided, if this is what my life is going to be, this is not how I wanted to live. So he stepped off the edge of the cliff.
And, all right. And then, so I think we're at a good ending point, almost. So, but
Yes.
you do have to end it, but I'm going to keep it going one more round. So the next time.
Okay, go ahead.
It's funny that you mentioned Wizard of Oz too, because I was thinking of the ruby slippers.
Yep.
So he's falling off the cliff. He's been deprived of his vacation, and I'm so
Yes, he's devastated because he can't go to China.
or New York or anywhere
Or
really.
yes.
But he's falling, and
Wait a minute. Let me help you. So after he jumped off the cliff, he thought he was going to fall to his death. He didn't realize that the shoes actually had magic powers, and he started to float. He didn't hit the ground of the rocks after all. He started to hover over the ground. There you are.
Thank you. And so he came to a soft landing on a pile of hay, which the hay didn't need to be there, but it was like Assassin's Creed. So, because that's what I was thinking of. He said, "Good Lord, thank God I can trust these shoes." And then, okay, check it.
And then he wrote other bad dialogue too. Oh, just kidding. He lands on this soft, pillowy hay, and he looks around.
You
And
should use straw because hay is not very comfortable. Straw is much more comfortable.
he lands on this beautiful soft straw, and he's looking around, and he notices first that the smell is not the same. It doesn't smell like burnt woods anymore. It doesn't smell like embers and char. It smells like fair food, like cotton candy and sausages and French fries. And as he's looking around curiously, he hears music. Not just any music, it is jazz music. It is lively jazz music. And he starts snapping his fingers and swaying, and the dance just comes over him all at once. He's full of it, alive, and he hops up onto one of the boulders, and he starts going for it. 100%, just swinging, and he is loving it. And as he's doing this, people and animals alike are starting to come out of the woods.
It's Clyde Blossoms all
It's
over.
Clyde Blossoms all over again. And he's putting on the performance of a lifetime. And he's just loving their reaction. Take it.
He dances this way for hours and hours and hours. Sweat continues to come down his brow. He's not sure how much longer he's going to go. He's thinking that this is kind of like a red shoes kind of story where he's going to dance to his death. Quickly, he stopped and stood and watched the audience and walked down into them so that he could be a part of them. Going over to the fairgrounds, he picked up a hot dog because after all that dancing, he was really hungry. So he picked up a hot dog and a soda and walked through the fair and decided that this is where life was going to be. The end.
Hold on, I'm going to add an afterword because I've been thinking about it for a while. Please fasten your seatbelts as we prepare for our final descent. Little Jimmy shook awake. He looked around.
Oh, good for you.
He was on an airplane, seated next to his other 6 cousins.
out of their way to China.
Tristan was still there, alive. Jack was still there, telling one of the other cousins some story. And Uncle Jed was asleep, but smiling creepily, and his gold tooth shining in the glint of the overhead light. And he looked out the window and saw that, after all that, they actually were going to New York. And down there was the Statue of Liberty beckoning him. It was time for him to dance.
There you go. That ended much better.
Wow. That story was wild.
So what'd you think of that process?
That was fun.
You said that you'd done something like this before.
Yes. Years ago, there was a group that I had on Facebook, and it was like an every Wednesday kind of thing. Wednesday at 7:00, someone would start the first line, and then I think there were like 10 or 15 of us, and then you would just continue to add the next line and the next line. So you'd build a story with all these people. It got a little chaotic because people were wanting to put their ideas in.
Yeah.
So there was no order. There was no way of making an order for it. You just had to put it in the best you could. And sometimes the story got a little chaotic, but it went pretty well. But people were trying to get in and get their stories in, and they couldn't. So sometimes they would fall away, and then new people would come on. But it was a lot of fun.
Once in a while, when we do this, because we've done 60 some odd of these now.
170, actually.
Yeah, almost 70 of these. One of us will come in with almost a fully formed idea, which sounds like it's great in theory, except it's really hard to pull off because the strings sort of break and it starts to go in weird directions, but it is fun.
Yeah, you have to be willing to give up. It's a team process. Give up on your initial idea and let it evolve and adapt.
Yeah.
This is cool that you end your podcast this way. I had a podcast with someone a couple years ago, and they always ended up that when you were a kid, what did you really want to become? So when you were like 6 or 7, what did you think you were going to be when you're an adult? And she asked me that question, and I said, I wanted to be a witch. That's the response I got from her. And she's like, excuse me? And I said, well, sure. When you're a witch, you've got all this power and you can do all these cool things. You don't have to be ugly or do mean things, but you have all this power that you can do really great things with. And
Sure.
She's like, I have never, ever had anyone tell me that he wanted to be a witch. So, yeah.
Apparently, I wanted to be a golf ball.
A golf.
I would tell my mom I wanted to be a golf ball.
All right.
Not even a golfer, just a golf ball.
I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any.
I have one more story for you. When I was interviewing for the Riverside Church, the guy who would be my boss asked me this final question. And he said, if this room were full of ping pong balls, how many ping pong balls would there be?
Mm-hmm.
So, and he looked at me like, seriously, what's the answer? And I looked back to him and I said, what color are the ping pong balls? And it just like totally changed his look because he's like, what? I said, well, if the ping pong balls are white like they normally would be, it would be a certain number. But if you painted them and they would be red, for instance, then the paint's going to be on it, meaning there'll be less balls. So what color are the balls?
That's a fair question.
His response was, when can you start? He was looking for someone to give him a creative answer. And I gave him that. So.
That, it reminds me of something I just saw on TikTok this morning where the guy he would approach random people at the supermarket and tell them a joke, why this, and then the answer would be something ridiculous, not a real punchline, and the people would laugh like they got it. Oh yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, he'd laugh along with him, and then he'd be like, explain it, and then they would be like, and they would just come up with the most ridiculous explanations, and then at the end he would tell them that it was just a nonsense joke.
I think that's a great idea.
It was pretty funny.
Why not be random? People need more of that in their lives, don't you think? I mean, people, there's so much stress and craziness that you got to go off the wall sometimes.
That's why we enjoy the podcast. Did you have something to say, or you look like you're...
I did, and then I forgot. It's gone. Oh, about what you wanted to do as a kid. I don't think there's any other answer other than writer for me, but...
Clarence is driven. He's been driven since he was born.
I was born a writer. I was born with a pen in my hand.
That's cool.
But
I was forced into it by my 16-year-old child.
We all get there in different ways.
That's very true.
Okay, so that's
Oh, wait. What are your 5 words?
so we're gonna jump right into that. Do you actually? So Clarence and I are gonna guess your words first, and don't reveal them until everyone's guessed. Go ahead with your guesses.
All right, my guess was cousins, burning, cement, and hot dog. Did I get any
No.
of them?
No.
I had cement and cousins as well. Okay. I also had coffee shop.
Nope.
I did have burning as well. Fire.
Nope.
Barn.
Nope.
Dirt.
Nope.
Damn.
What else did you say? That the site doesn't give names, does it? I don't know, Tristan.
No, I don't think it does give names. No.
That's one of my
Alright.
favorite characters' names. Tristan.
Could it have been the same character in some crossover universe,
Oh, sure.
except that she dies?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so what were your words?
Brainstorm, very first sentence, and also 7, because there were 7 cousins.
I have to
And
guess a
then
number.
fantastic, English, because they wanted to go to a non-English speaking country.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
then he had no words. So brainstorm, fantastic, 7, English, and words.
All
So
right.
you got all of them.
Yeah.
Well, you might have actually won this round. I thought you said non-English speaking country because you were just trying to spice it up, make it more interesting. But then I sort of floundered because, like, you said Taiwan. Well, I was next, so I could have said anything. But
But I did lean towards
I should
Taiwan.
have said like Thailand or something because I've been there.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's guess Clarence's words then.
Oh.
You go first.
I have no idea.
All right.
Yeah, you were tricky there. Not as obvious as I was. I said ballet at first, but then I realized that you were just building off of the conversation.
And you
Is that
said that a
right?
lot.
Is that your final answer?
Did you do ballet?
I did ballet.
Really? So one of
Wow.
his words was ballet.
And one of my words was
He
ballet.
said ballet a lot.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then wow, I actually got one right. Country names wouldn't be in there like Taiwan.
I don't think so.
Rolling, licking,
Nope.
stone or rock.
Nope.
Fluorescent.
Airplane.
Nope.
So something Clarence does a lot when we play is he'll throw in some words that he wouldn't normally use just to throw you off the trail, and then he'll throw in one of his random words. Or he'll squeeze them all into one sentence really
One
fast.
sentence.
I've done that before. Yeah. I've thrown in some bullshit sentences just
It's
to.
funny. I thought about doing that at the very beginning just to get it out of the way.
So we didn't guess any of his. Well, I guess one of his words.
Yeah.
So that's
You got one. All right. My words were reaction, loot, shatter, ballet, and woman. And I used them all.
You did.
nice. But I guess one of your words.
Yes.
So Chris beat you in that regard.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. What were my words? I think Clarence got them right away. You go first, though.
Gold tooth.
Nope. Good guess.
That is a good guess. What else could it have been? Was it airplane?
Nope.
Dun, dun,
What were your
dun,
guesses?
dun. Mine were golden, which was no. Magic, deprived,
Yeah, I did deprive. That was pretty obvious.
lord,
That's-
Nope.
and descent.
No.
No.
So I used deprive, and I also used trust. I thought that one was pretty obvious, but I think you just thought I was doing bad dialogue.
Yeah.
And then I also had palace, which would have made sense, but we were at the end of the story. So because I was going to say, oh, he fell in the hay and then he saw a palace. That opens up a whole another chapter.
Yeah.
So I refrained. Context, which I didn't use. And I crossed off party. Did I use it at the end? Party of 6 or something?
I don't know.
I don't know why I would have. Oh, unless I was like preparing to use it and didn't. So I think I only used 2 of my words.
Okay.
Yeah.
This was a fun game.
Yeah, that was a fun story. And then I thought we were going to go to New York sooner, so I was going to slip in. Have you ever? I assume you've been to the Ellen Stardust Diner.
Yes.
So that's one of my favorite New York memories. Is that I've been there a couple times actually, and I've always wanted to write a love story, or like a love triangle of a story about people trying to make it in Broadway and working at this restaurant. And then there's like two men maybe that love the same girl, and it's sort of like a musical, and they're trying to profess their love through song at the restaurant. I don't know. I never developed the story, but I always thought
that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wanted to sneak that diner into the story, but we just never made it.
Never got that far.
He goes there after the story ends.
There you go.
Beautiful. Well done, guys.
Yeah. Yes, it was cool.
So
thank you so much.
We also use this spot for if you wanted to talk about anything else, shout out any upcoming projects that you're working. I saw that you had one coming soon on your website. Besides the magazine. If I click on the books, it says after all
my next book. Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that for a second. So what's happened with the books is that a lot of it's kind of become this series kind of thing. It started out in Bless Me Father with this particular family, the Matthews family. And they've been in, I think, 4 or 5 of the 9 so far. And the last one I did, it was called Just a Pool of Light. And it was like the first part of this particular part of their lives, or this year. And so it's a pool of light. And now it's going to go into submission. And submission is just the pool of light was the positive part of the year. And then justice and submission is the negative part of the year. And it's coming into difficulty to write for me because it's not necessarily it's submission that you think it would be submission, but the things that people actually submit to in their lives, kind of like the trade thing. You're submitting to these things because you have no choice. You have to submit to your boss being nasty to you because you need the job, or you're submitting to not fulfilling your dreams because you can't find your way out of the hole, or the direction that you need to go to make it there. You don't have the knowledge to get you to where you need to go. Those kinds of things. There's a little bit of submission in there too, but that's the gist of the whole thing. But when we were talking about our story that we had created, the burning barn actually is part of it. So there's this family, there's about 80 of them, and they have several different businesses throughout this town. It's called Jackson, and this woman, the interior designer, her name is Claire, and her mother was from Florida, and she's evil, and she came and she started her design shop on fire. But when she got the call for that, she also found out that her husband, Orchard, was also on fire. So instead of going to her shop, she went back to the orchard, saw her husband going into the barn to save it with a couple of other people, and then the barn falls down. And that cement block is for real. He goes into the cement block to save himself. They figure out where he's going, and they get him out, thinking that everything's okay. But because his smoke inhalation is so bad, he starts to cough and gives himself a heart attack, and he actually dies.
And so this is the beginning of your story.
This is like the beginning of the story. So what happens is he is... as a child, he was afraid of the dark, so he had a flashlight underneath his pillow all the time. His parents were trying to break him of that habit, and they would all steal it back. He has 4 brothers who stole the flashlight back from his parents all the time to give it to him so that he would feel safe at night. So as he died, they're going to do his funeral, and his wife decided, because even now, as an adult, he still had a flashlight by his bed, or had to have a nightlight. So she wanted to put a flashlight in his casket with him. And no one knew what was going on until the 4 brothers came up to talk to her and wanted to find out what the flashlight was for. And then they told her the story that he always would sleep with it. So now all of them are going to put the flashlight in the coffin.
Huh. I like that. Your characters seem to have a lot of depth.
They're
multidimensional.
That's a pretty good thread right there.
So where should we start, or our listeners, where would you recommend they start? Right at the beginning, or what's your favorite book? That was one of my that you've written.
The favorite book is The Trade. I like that one, and I like Bless Me Father, and Water's Edge. Those are my three favorite books.
And can we start any of the books that have connections at any point, or
no? So you have to read. It goes Bless Me Father, The Trade, then Wild Swan, and then Water's Edge, and now The Pool of Light. So those five are the ones you have to do in a row, and then submission will be the last. I don't want to. That you get to a point where you're tired of the characters, but this will be the last of the Matthews family.
okay?
Throughout the entire thing, it's a really cool that they're a really cool family to be part of. I mean, everyone helps each other. Everyone wants to be really cool with each other. They don't argue too much. They're family, so they obviously do. But each of them they're very entrepreneurial. So each of them has their own business, and they try and help each other. And it's good to the point where, excuse me, they gather on every holiday at this orchard because he has a ballroom. There's 80 of them. So they have a ballroom that they go to, and all the holidays and all the birthdays. And this is kind of just what they do. They're known throughout the community because they have so many businesses that interconnect and help each other. And they have now, think about it, if you have all these kids, they've gone through school, so then you know them as well. And they're just very popular in this town. And when Boston dies, his name is Boston, by the way, dies, it's rather a huge thing because everybody in town knows who he is. He has an orchard. People go out there to get their fruits, their vegetables. I mean, he's created this really cool place for people to go, and now that'll all be gone. So it becomes a really cool big thing. And so if you're going to start somewhere, start with the first one and then work your way up from there.
All right,
Perfect.
cool. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast.
And I should say it too. The story goes like these five boys are what are they? 16, 14, 13, 12, and 10. So when the first book that they're young, and now in Just a Pool of Light, they're in their 60s. So it takes you from being a kid into your 60s to know what has to happen. So there's all kinds of things that go on. There's in each one of the books somebody passes away. Each one of the book there's always somebody coming back and trying to do something to them because they don't like that they have all this connection, and then there's always something that gives them a little bit of trauma.
Cool. Before we take off, do you want to shout out where we could find your work?
You can do that on Breaking News Publishing. That still has my books on there. You can go to the Christopher Clawson Company. That also has my books there. You can go on Amazon Kindle, and I think that's it.
And the magazines as well. Is that like a subscription format? Do you have like a Patreon or?
No, I didn't want to do it too much because the magazines are going to be, we didn't talk about this much. The magazines are going to be different because magazines are kind of going out of style. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to make a hard copy because, like me, I like to have a tangible thing in my hand when I'm reading it. I don't like to read off the computer. And they're going to be digital. And then everything in the magazines is also going to be done on podcasts so that you can get the information there as well.
Right.
So there's 3 ways that you can get it. And that too gives the advertisers 3 different places where their advertisements can go. So it's kind of a cool little setup.
So the hard copy is just going to be an Amazon sort of thing?
Yes.
All right. Well, we will share the links when that's available. In the meantime, we will have all your links in the show notes for this episode. And yeah, unless you have more to talk about, I think that's a wrap.